Hey everybody, welcome to the Baby Lock Ovation Serger Manual. Today what I'd like to do is talk about the 5-thread stitch. I received some questions from subscribers asking how to do an accurate 5/8 inch seam allowance while using this stitch. So I thought I would show you that, and I thought I would show you how to set up your serger for a 5-thread. If you're following along in the manual, we are on pages 56 and 57. I think you can see that it's been a little crazy in my studio today because I have this adorable little zebra that keeps popping up on my work surface, and I'm a little distracted by him. So I'm hoping this will go okay and I can show you this without, too many distractions. So the 5-thread stitch is really comprised of two different stitches. It's the chain stitch and the 3-thread overlock that come together to make your 5-thread stitch. And to keep it clear, when I've actually stitched the sample, I'm going to use blue thread for the chain stitch and black thread for my 3-thread overlock. And that way it'll have sort of a separation between the two parts of the 5 threads. You can see the difference. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to thread the upper looper, and it's very important to make sure you're clicking in the back and catching the thread guide in the front of the machine. And then I'm just going to floss it back and forth for a second to make sure it's seated in there properly. And then I'm going to go ahead and get my, my lower looper thread as well. Click it in, get that ready. I have to set my machine up so I can use the threading. So I'm going to switch my guide to threading, and I'm going to turn the hand wheel towards me slowly so it snaps into place. All right, so I'm going to do the lower looper first, and I'm just going to stick it in there. Okay, and it pops out over here. And now that I have the lower looper, I'm going to do the upper looper. So lower looper thread goes in the L, upper looper goes in the U. Okay, see how that just zipped right over? All right, so now I've got those two, I've got my overlock loopers threaded. Now I'm gonna do my chain looper. And first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stick it through the hole at the top of the guide. It's hard to see. And then I'm gonna wrap it underneath the guide and then up and around like that and like that. So now I'm going to stick the blue thread in the chain looper port. Push the button. Now remember, we can't see. If this is your first time using the chain looper, you have to open the door on the side to see where your thread went. There's a little box right here that catches thread. So what you want to do is have about 4 inches of thread in there and just tuck that back into the box. So I'm just going to clip that, and I'm going to all right, so now my chain looper thread is okay. Now all I have left to do are the needles. So I'm going to start with my overlock needle, which is going to be the black thread. And it's overlock needle 1, so I'm just going to put this like this in the guide, click it in, and go over and back down. Now, there's a lot going on here with things in the way. So first thing I'm going to do is unselect my threader so I can move my hand wheel. Then I'm just going to take my presser foot off because that gives me just extra room to thread. So I'm just going to get this into my 01 or left overlock needle. Okay, and now I'm going to do my chain needle. And for that, remember, you're clicking your thread securely into this back guide first. So I'm going down and a little bit to the right like that, and then I'm coming underneath this clip right here, back around, back down. and in there. So now I can thread my chain needle. Now the interesting thing is the way you determine the width of your 5-thread stitch is dependent on where you put that needle. Okay, the needles have an 1/8 inch separation between them. So if you're using the very left or the C1 needle, that's going to give you the widest stitch because it's the farthest away from the blade. And that would be your 5/8 inch seam allowance. So you can see here, I've got my needle in the C1 position. And that's going to give me that nice wide seam allowance. All right, so let me just thread this needle and then we'll put the foot back on. And the easiest way to do that is to come in perpendicular like this and then twist it into place and then lower it on like that. Okay, so the stitch length knob down here, I'm going to set that to about 3. You can go anywhere from 2.5 to 4, but I'll do sort of a middle of the road 3 for a stitch. And then my stitch width, I need at my maximum 7.5. Okay, and the reason why we're using the 7.5 versus the 5 number, the smaller 5 number, is because we're using that left overlock needle. If we were using the right overlock needle, then we would be using the smaller numbers because those numbers are smaller because the measurement is smaller because the right needle is closer to the blade. Okay, so we're using the 7.5 as our cutting width. All right, there are 2 more things that we want to make sure are good before we start stitching. We want our stitch selector on A. Okay, it's over here on the side. And we also want to make sure our tension on our chain looper is for the chain stitch. Okay, so check your tension over here to make sure that's on chain stitch versus cover hem. And also, of course, we want our selector here to be on overlock. All right, so that's gonna set us up. Let's do a test stitch and see how it works. All right, so to get the accurate 5/8 inch seam allowance, what you're gonna do is you're just gonna skim the fabric along the edge of the knife. And you can see from this cut edge to my stitching, if I put the ruler here, you can see that that is exactly 5/8 inch. All right, so you don't really have to worry about any of the stitch guides on the machine itself, because if you're just skimming the edge of your seam, like the edge of your fabric, just trimming off those loose threads that you serge, you'll get the perfect 5/8 inch seam allowance. Now the cool thing is, if you're a 1/2 inch kind of girl like I am, if you move your needle, your chain needle into the center or C2 position, that's going to give you a 1/2 inch seam allowance, because what it's going to do is it's going to move this seam or this chain stitch over an 1/8 of an inch. So you'll go from 5/8 to 1/2 inch. And then if you're looking for a narrow, a more narrow seam, 3/8, if you use the C3 needle, it'll move it over a 1/4 inch from here and you'll get the 3/8 inch seam allowance. So I think that's just kind of a cool thing. And because it's so quick, I'm just going to quickly show you the difference. So I'm going to just quickly take my needle out of the C1 position and stick it in the C2 position. And I'll just stick another piece of fabric in there and show you the difference. Put your fabric in, and notice I'm just even with the knife on the side. I'm going to start stitching. All right, so let me show you the difference. We have on this side the 5/8, and then here is my 1/2 inch. Okay, so if I move the needle down to the C3 needle, the needle closest to the blade, I would get a 3/8. So that's how you get your accurate seam allowances. I just want to flip these over so you can see. On the wrong side, you have that heavier chain stitch. Okay, so that would be on the underside of your seam. So keep that in mind when you're using a 5-thread stitch, that you do have a heavier seam versus using your sewing machine and just doing a regular straight stitch. But that's how they look on the underside. If you have any questions about how to do a 5-thread and get an accurate seam allowance, please let me know. You can post comments below. You can visit my blog at J Stern Designs. Okay, I guess I also have to extend John Oliver a thank you for this lovely in-studio guest I had today, our little zebra. He's very cute. I hope he wasn't too distracting, and I will see you again next time.